I'm live on tape from Sydney, Ohio. And today we're talking about the origins of the Asian mist in wrestling, also known as the Dokugiri. I hope I pronounced that right. I probably slaughtered that word. The Dokugiri, or the Asian mist, goes back to the 1980s. Gary Hart was a promoter and a manager throughout the 60s and 70s in various promotions. And then in the 80s, he was with WCCW out of Texas and did more showy things in WCCW. Well, he hooked up with a wrestler by the name of Toshi Aro, or whatever his name was. I don't remember. I can't pronounce Japanese names, and I don't pretend to pronounce Japanese names. Through Bruiser Brody, and then had an overseas trip and seen Kabuki theater. So him and Toshiho, I think is what his name was. His wrestling name was Toshiho. And they went to the West Coast and started buying masks and swords and all sorts of robes and everything. And with a little face paint and some Kabuki masks, they created the Great Kabuki. Toshiho now was the Great Kabuki. With face paint and a Kabuki came out in a Kabuki mask, he became the Great Kabuki. Now, why am I talking about the Great Kabuki? Because now we're getting in the origin of the mist. It wasn't some magic moment, wasn't something they came up with, planned, or anything. Gary Hart's wife spilled some food coloring on the counter when she was making some cookies, and Gary Hart had an aha moment. He mixed some food coloring with some mouthwash and put in a condom and called Kabuki over to his house, and they got the timing right, and the mist was born. Now, the mist originally being mouthwash would have originally burned the opponent's eyes, because mouthwash has alcohol in it, and alcohol burns when you spit in your opponent's eyes. But anyways, so the Great Kabuki's greatest trick, the mist, was born, and the Great Kabuki became sensational. He wrestled in WCCW in Texas, and then they'd go to Georgia Championship Wrestling, which had a TV spot, had a national TV spot, and he became a big hit all around the nation, to the effect that Gary Hart created a second Great Kabuki out of a wrestler known as the White Dragon. He dressed him up as Great Kabuki. So there are two Great Kabukis wrestling in the 80s. One wrestling in Georgia Championship Wrestling at times, and one wrestling in WCCW simultaneously at times, fulfilling dates because the Great Kabuki was that popular. Now, by the end of the 1980s, Gary Hart and Great Kabuki's relationship was over, and the Great Kabuki went back to Japan, and the Mist went with him. But Ted Turner had bought an NWA affiliate and had turned it into WCW and had given it a national TV spot on TBS. And he told Gary Hart to come and help him be an honor manager and help backstage. And he wanted Gary Hart to create a character like the Great Kabuki. So he went down in Florida and got a wrestler by the name of the White Ninja, brought him up, painted his face, and gave him the mist. And born was the Great Muta, who was built as the son of the Great Kabuki, and who wrestled as a face and used the mist on heels. He was the first wrestler to use the mist as a face. Now, by now, Gary Hart and the Great Muta's time together was short-lived, and the Great Muta went back to Japan, but still came over occasionally to wrestle in WCW, where he became a big sensation both in the United States and in Japan. He was one of the most popular wrestlers of all time in Japan. Now, in WWF in the 80s, they had a wrestler named Killer Khan who used the Mist, but he wasn't a big wrestler. And in the 90s in WWF, because they copied everything that was popular, they put Savio Vega under a mask and made him an Asian character called Kwang and gave him the Mist. But once again, he didn't get over. It wasn't really in the WWF. A wrestler didn't get over using the Mist till it was Tajiri, who was known for speed and his athleticism and his martial arts skill using the Mist in the aughts. In the cruiserweight division, and he used the Mist. The WWF finally had a worker who was popular in using the Mist. Now nowadays, a lot of people use the Mist. Asuka uses the Mist. Malachi Black in AEW uses the Mist. Rosemary in TNA. Julia Hart in AEW. I think Shinsuke Nakamura in WWE has been known on occasion to use the Mist. Various people have used the Mist nowadays, more recently. But back in the day, it was mainly Asian characters or people who were supposed to be Asian. Now, the Mist colors vary. And as I learned doing research, the various colors are supposed to do various things. This is not true anymore. But the colors originally were supposed to do various things. Green was supposed to temporarily blind your opponent. Red was supposed to burn with the burn of 1,000 suns. I mean, it really burned the eyes. Black was supposed to blind your opponent for weeks. I mean, Jerry used it on Nydia in the odds, and she was blinded for 2 weeks. Now, as we know now, Malachi Black's black just hurts the vision temporarily, and Julia Hart's Black Mist somehow brings out a darker side to them and makes them more aggressive. So I don't know if that's going to be rooted in Mist lore somehow, but yellow. Is yellow paralyzed or does yellow put to sleep? Yellow either paralyzes or puts to sleep. Yellow and blue, one of them paralyzes and one of them puts to sleep. While purple causes a distraction and causes memory loss. I get yellow and blue mixed up because they really don't do a whole lot. I think yellow paralyzes and blue puts to sleep. Don't quote me on that. So it all started via an accident in the 80s. Now, there's been a lot of people who've used the Mist over the years. I'm not going to list them all. I can't remember a list like that. This is all done off the top of my head, and you've seen I've already fucked up. So that is the history of the Mist in wrestling. It's mainly been Asian characters, but it was originally invented by a white dude in Texas. Now, nowadays, they don't use mouthwash with the Mist. They mainly use water and some balloons, not condoms. They still use food coloring, or sometimes they use drink mixes. So that is this week's show. Next week, we're going back into the NWO with the NWO 2000. Black and silver. So this has been me coming to you live on tape from Sydney, Ohio.